Chinese President Xi Jinping will head for Europe to visit Italy, Monaco and France this week, with the Italian government expected to sign a memorandum of understanding with Beijing to officially support the Belt and Road Initiative. At a time of many conflicts within Europe and trade pressure from the U.S. on China, what is the special significance of China-Europe relations to both sides, and will Italy's participation in the Belt and Road lead to more support or resistance in the West? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department of European Studies at the Chinese Institute of International Studies. We shall also be joined from Rome by Michele Geraci, and the Secretary of State Ministry of Economic Development of Italy, and from Paris by Huawei, Chairman of the Bridge Tank. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Mr. Cui, European countries have surprisingly become the first destination of President Xi's overseas trip in the year 2019. Is there any understatement or implied message in the choice of Europe instead of other parts of the world for President Xi?
I don't think that the European side should be surprised about this, decision of Mr. Xi to have Europe as a first destination for his visit this year, because as we remember that the last year, the last visit by Mr. Xi is also Europe. So I think, firstly, it's a continued efforts from China to strengthen its ties with Europe. Why? I think, firstly, China-Europe cooperation it achieved a lot, even in those years. Because in the background of the job of international trade and economy, but for China-Europe trade and economic relations is getting, up and up. Secondly, I think it's a very critical time for China and Europe to show more consensus, especially how to uphold this multilateralism and how to keep opening and also the free trade and opening economic system. So I think it's in the expectation from Chinese perspective, and also I believe that during this visit, Mr. Xi and his counterpart in Europe, they will try to find more consensus, and they will try to push forward more and more pragmatic cooperation, not only in the frame of BRI and also maybe in some other platform.
Let me cross over to Zhou Rui, head of think tank in Paris. Hello, Zhou. Good to have you on our program. This year witnesses the 55th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between France and China.
Yep.
France is one of the three countries for President Xi this time around. What do you think of the message that President Xi delivers at a time when the embattled President Emmanuel Macron is deeply mired in the Yellow Vest demonstrations?
Well, good evening, Yang Ray. It's always a pleasure. We Europeans should be pragmatic, and we should be modest. President Xi, we know, visits very regularly Africa, Asia. Now this is Europe. We are, of course, very happy to welcome him in Italy and in France. I think it's important at the time in the world history where there's a new equation between China on the one hand and America on the other hand. The key question is also what will be the side, or not the side, but what will be the role Europe will play in this equation. Italy has its view, France has its view. It's good we start the discussion like this.
Mr. Cui, why did President Xi choose Italy as the first leg for his European tour?
I think it shows the importance of Italy, not only for Chinese economic cooperation and also for strategic cooperation. As we know, this year is the 15th anniversary of China-Italy established a comprehensive strategic partnership, and it's also the 10 years, since the last Chinese head of state visited Italy. So I think it gives a very big significance. And also, as we know, recently in Italy, Italian government and the society, they showed a lot of active requirement for Chinese cooperation, not only in the Belt and Road Initiative, and also on some other, regional and global issues. So I think it's a real requirement of cooperation from Italy, and also it's China takes the importance of Italy as one of advanced economy, firstly in Eurozone, and then in European Union, and also in Western advanced economies. So I think it will give some more positive example once there are some more exchange and more successful cooperation between two countries.
Under the growing pressure from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, namely the United States, with regard to Belt and Road Initiative, do you think when we look at the domestic politics in Italy, it is very difficult for the newly elected or newly appointed Italian Prime Minister to really address the issue of having more Chinese investment in the building of tele-infrastructure and the Belt and Road Initiative at this moment?
Yes, I think that because Italy would be the first country, first member in the G7 to sign the MOU in BRI with China, undoubtedly it could feel some more pressure from outside, not only from the United States and also maybe from other member states of the European Union. I think it's as natural as possible. But another question for Italy is, how could it decide its own interests? Because as we know, the biggest demand for Roma is to develop economy firstly, and to promote the living standard of people. Because as we know, even now, the Italian economy is facing some challenges. But of course, now it has, a normal government, and with two new parties. But I hope that no matter which kind of a party in the position of government, it should really understand the real interests of Italian people, and then how could enlarge these benefits of cooperation with China. So I believe that not only the Italian government and also Chinese side, we are working together now and to evaluate any risks, not only for the economic field itself and also from some political instability. But I believe that we should try to find out the way to deal with any risks ahead.
Thank you so much. Let me go back to Mr. Huawei, head of the French think tank. Hello, Ho. France and Italy are both members of G7, and of course you are also the Mediterranean economies. Now this time around, President Xi chose Italy as the first leg. What do you think will be the most likely deliverables that the newly appointed Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte have through the negotiations and talk with President Xi Jinping this time around? And what will the outcome of the official talks actually mean for the future of the European Union at a time when British politicians, the members of parliament, are talking loudly about the Brexit?
You know, one should understand that, I think it's a key question. One should understand that Italy is a very vibrant, very dynamic economy. It's part of the G7. It's not just history. It's contemporary. It still has a vibrant industry. It has a design industry, and it has an interesting investment banking system. What Italy suffers today is lack of infrastructure, and it suffers lack of infrastructure because it is part of the Eurozone, and it's been badly affected by the Eurozone. So Italy needs investment in infrastructure, and this is what President Xi Jinping can bring. This is what the Belt and Road Initiative is about. But Italy can bring to the Belt and Road Initiative some other opportunities in industry, in innovation, in industrial design, and in investment banking, private equity, and so on. So I think the question is what Italy gains, but what can Italy bring? And somehow the Belt and Road Initiative is for Italy a way to balance the effect of the Eurozone while putting ahead its own industrial skills.
very articulate about these points. But Mr. Ray, do you think the strength and the legitimacy of the European Union will still rely on what you call the consensus-building principles? Because President Emmanuel Macron calls for a coordinated approach regarding China policy.
Yes.
But Italians and Greeks are very eager to improve their business relationship with Beijing. Do you think this runs the risk of weakening the solidarity of a European Union at a time of discussing the prospects of Brexit?
Well, you mentioned the Italians, you mentioned the Greek, very rightly so. You might add the Portuguese, you might add the Spanish, you might add the Romanians, the Bulgarians, and so on and so forth. Most of them are part of the EU. Some are only in the 16+1, but most of them are in the EU. Majority or near majority countries in the EU, current EU, are either already in the Belt and Road or intrigued by the Belt and Road Initiative. So that shows what? That shows there is a debate in Europe. That doesn't mean this should hamper the coordination, because most of those countries want to go ahead in a current status where there is no coordination, but that doesn't mean those countries would reject the coordination. That is the first point. The second point, this coordination mechanism is not new. It has been started since 2016, and every year there are talks between China and the EU at Brussels level to discuss about the coordination. What we see today is rather an acceleration.
Well, when we look at the issue of a coordination, it should be examined in the specific context of Belt and Road Initiative. And it's an open secret that Washington is not very happy about any concessions that the European Union is likely to make with China about the memorandum of BRI. How big is the pressure from Brussels, and what does it mean for politicians in Rome? And I would expect you to look at the issue of Huawei. Do you think, following the cautious attitudes of Berlin and London, Italy will be the third heavyweight member of G7 or European Union to give a second thought to using Huawei as part of its tele-infrastructure in continental Europe? Excuse me? Okay, I suddenly disconnected with this European commentator in France. What do you think of the sensitivity of this issue?
I think it depends on which stand you will take. I think from China's perspective, it would not be a sensitive issue, because the 5G network issue, essentially, it's a technology and a market issue. Once the Chinese companies, it could take advantage of technology and development, and it could be chosen by the market. But of course, once you stand from Washington, yes, it's a very, very serious issue, because it is related directly with a security issue and even military or even defense issue. So if you look at this stand, yes, it's very, very big problem. So that's also a reason why we can find so far the diversity of the stance of European countries. Maybe some countries, they have to follow up the pressure from Washington. They have to announce some measures to limit the entrance of Huawei or some other Chinese companies in this field. But for some other countries, once it has a more independent policy, it should not to follow up this pressure from Washington. Just like what happened recently, the German Chancellor Merkel, she stressed this importance. Germany should decide which companies to go into the market of Germany in 5G, not only because this company is from which country. So it showed that maybe Germany will try to believe that it should be the market and the technology will be the decisive factor for this 5G issue.
Well, politics chases money, or the other way around. Let me go back to Mr. Huawei, the French commentator based in, or standing by in Paris. Huawei, we are talking about the 5G and Huawei. What do you think of the sensitivity of this issue for the Europeans from your perspective? And do you think this young Italian Prime Minister, who is said to be the product of political compromise after the elections, will have the ability and political resilience to survive the scrutiny and skeptical eyes of the European political heartland in Brussels?
You know, in this field, the European technology doesn't exist yet. So either the Europeans go for American technology or for Chinese technology. Now back to Huawei. Huawei is a company which has invested constantly for the last 20 years, every year, roughly 15% of its turnover into R&D. So the technological advance can be explained easily by the technological investment, by the R&D. So, you know, all the kind of complotist theories have never been proved right. Secondly, one part of the advance of Huawei is due to the fact that early back China needed to make energy savings, and the regulations in the Chinese market were to put the 2G and the 3G into the same box and save energy. And this is what explained the spread of Huawei into Europe some years ago. Now the competition is open again, and I think we should be much more relaxed and look at it as a technological company. So I think this is very important. And I think that today Huawei is only a kind of subject or topic which is agitated by some part of the Western propaganda. And we should not just base our decisions on what to do with the Belt and Road Initiative just on one case, one company. We need to work seriously on this company, but we should discuss as seriously what are the ideas, what are the methodology, and what are the economic prospects beyond the Belt and Road Initiative. You know, we should not miss the forest for the tree, as we say.
Thank you so much. Let me go to our Italian commentator, Mr. Michele Giracci. Hello. Michele, good to eventually have you on our program. It's a difficult process. It's a long march. It's a journey to get connected with Rome. Now, we are talking about why President Xi Jinping has chosen Italy as the first leg in the three-country tour of Europe. And first of all, let's go to your domestic politics. The understatement of Italian relationship with China might have a lot to do with the alleged vibrance and the resilience of this young prime minister, who is said to be a product of political compromise between, you know, the Five-Star Movement and the League. To what degree do you think he will survive the public scrutiny and live up to the expectations with the mandate in his hand to talk about the BRI? Or do you think he, a symbol of an Italian movement that wants to say goodbye to European Union, which accuses euro as of being a flawed currency? This guy is a smart and honest guy, but tell us more about what he can do in the official talk with the President Xi Jinping.
Thank you, Yang Ray. No, I tell you, despite what you may hear, the government is quite compact on the willingness to sign the MOU with China. Both the Lega and the Five-Star Movement are very interested in trying to boost business ties with China. The problem is that Italy exports to China only relatively low value of goods, only 13 billion. French and England do 20 billion, Switzerland 22, Germany 87. So we are all aligned to make sure that our Italian company do find a market in what is now one of the biggest and fastest growing markets in the world, such as China. And this is a win-win situation because also it gives Chinese consumers the opportunity to choose different quality and different variety of products. We know the advantages of trade, and in that respect the government is very solid. And obviously no one in the government would want to say, oh no, we do not want to do business with China. And so Mr. Conte is quite in a relatively comfortable and strong position, representing the two parties that have, however, very, very similar views, and that's why we came to, just yesterday, the Parliament voted in favor of this agreement with China, an agreement that we have been discussing for several months. So I do not see any internal political crisis as a result of this agreement with China. In fact, once the numbers start to go up, we'll get even more stronger support.
Earlier, I was discussing with a French guest speaker, Mr. Huawei, about what President Emmanuel Macron meant by calling for a coordinated approach regarding China policy. Now, following the gateway that we established with Athens of Greece, by heavy investment in one of the ports there, what do you think of the prospects of making more Chinese investment in your ports to further open up the gate and the gateway deep into economic and political heartland of the European Union?
Well, the language of the MOU indeed does refer to the European-Asian Connectivity Program, so it is completely in line with the cooperation within the EU and China. Italy is, I say, maybe for the first time, leading Europe into outreaching a very strong partner such as China, and I'm sure that all our European friends, including France, will see the benefit of this agreement. And I know some people are already starting to look at the template of our MOU as a basis for their own agreement. You know, France, Chinese investment in France is already present in Marseille, in Le Havre in the north, and the Chinese is present in Valencia, Bilbao, Rotterdam, Zeebrugge, Malta, of course Greece, the Athens port, pretty much Egypt, Suez Canal, Israel, you know, everywhere except in Italy. And so what we are doing is not to break with the European Union. In fact, other countries have been ahead of Italy, and all we want to do is catch up, and so that we go back at par in terms of doing business with China, in terms of attracting investment, and so that we can, yes, have a European-Chinese common cooperation into the Silk Road, the Middle East, into Africa, which I think would be beneficial for all parties involved, Europeans, Chinese, and even the third countries involved. So our French friends have nothing to fear. We're just trying to get a little bit of catching up with the time that we have lost in the last decade.
Michela, Italy's Ministry of Economic Development launched a task force China in August last year. What is the importance and what are the missions for this newly established approach to advance its economic cooperation with China?
The purpose of the task force that we launched a few months ago is ultimate goal is to increase business, commercial and investment relationship between the two countries. The way we do it is in several stages. Stage one is information sharing, informing our Italian companies of the opportunities that may exist in China, both in terms of trade and also in terms of investment. Let's not forget that our Italian company are very keen also to invest in China. So this is not just a one-way flow that we are looking for. It's not just that we want to attract Chinese investment into, for example, Italian ports, but we also want our Italian company to invest in China. And you know, the figures show that Italian investment into China overall is in the range of 20 billion, and we have created in China about 100,000 jobs. One of the biggest investment is in Hangzhou, a company that makes chocolate, very successful, giving jobs to also Chinese employees. And we want to invest in China. So the purpose of this task force is to inform, maybe relaxation of regulation. We're looking for interest at the recent amendment on the Chinese WFI, foreign investment law, to see if this opens up opportunity for our company to invest. And so this is the purpose of the task force.
Yes, indeed, it is a good opportunity for Italian policymakers to examine the impact of the foreign investment law on the prospects of the bilateral relationship between Brussels and China. Let me go back to Zhu Hui. This official visit by President Xi Jinping, the first of its kind in 2019, takes place against the backdrop of a recent adoption of a 10-point proposal regarding China. It's a policy paper by the European Union. Now, a lot of the Chinese media fanfare focused on whether European Union follows U.S. example in, exerting pressure on China regarding our 2025 5G roadmap, kind of a geopolitical rivalry. It seems that will further add to the mistrust between entirely different political institutions in the West and China. It's not just about trade and trade itself. Well, Cui, what do you think of this 5-point proposal? What would be the impact?
I think most of the media take a note of this maybe a new definition from the European Union about China, especially this so-called economic commentator and also the systemic rival and so on. But I can find out carefully that the European Union is trying to keep the distance on its tone and its stand with the United States. Because as we know, so far, the American administration regarded China as a strategic rival. So I think, yes, at the same time, European Union also try to keep the balance of its recognition about China. Not only some competition in economic field, not only maybe some competition in systems, but at the same time, European Union also takes the value of its cooperation with China in, firstly, global governance level, including the climate change or some other. Just like this time during Mr. Xi's visit in Paris, I hope that both two sides will collect all of the consensus on the global governance and the regional stability, everything, and to find more consensus on this issue. At the same time, European Union also try to keep China as a negotiation partner. What does it mean? Which means that the European Union also try to take use of negotiation to deal with any differences, any conflicts with China. So I think it would be more healthy. On one side, we should be pragmatic, but of course, on the other side, we should be more ambitious. For China and the EU, because we are shouldering more and more responsibilities, and then we can try to find out more cooperation, even from competition itself.
It seems politicians in Brussels and policymakers of the Eurozone both wrestling with the conflict between restricting the Chinese influence and having more of the Chinese investment. Do you think this is an equilibrium of great urgency for politicians in Europe?
To some degree, yes. There are some politicians in Europe. I think that they do have some maybe traditions of this Cold War mindset. Because firstly, they define China as a very different country, very different culture, and a very different political system. So no matter which kind of behaviors or activities of China in Europe, because it's from China, so it's wrong, or maybe it's not so comfortable. But I think that once there are some consensus between China and Europe, and also once there are more pragmatic cooperation, we can try to deal with this misunderstanding.
In fact, the founding father of the European Union shared much of the same consensus of Confucianism, namely common but differentiated. Will that be the principle in cementing the two sides, European Union and China? Let's take a second look after President Xi wraps up his official visit, the first of its kind in 2019. Until then, goodbye.